Hi everyone, Marco and Code here for a brand new episode of our special edition Lore of the Universal Century. Today we are going back again to the 1 Year War era in an attempt to answer a particular question, which is... Yep, in this video we are going to explore the history of the ultimate 1 Year War DOM, its mechanical lore, variants, and extract every bit of mechanical knowledge we have on them so far. But let's start by the beginning. What is exactly the Dwadge? Codenamed MS-09G Dwadge, sometimes called Dwadge and often simply referred to as DOM, was a limited production ground use mobile suit, serving as the most advanced entry of the DOM series of the Principality of Xion during the 1 Year War. A machine created to succeed the DOM as Xion's mainstay heavy mobile suit on the gravity front, the Dwadge was a minor yet comprehensive upgrade of the DOM's design, specially revamped for ground combat, the exotic guerrilla warfare, and improved versatility and practicality. Indeed, the Dwadge was a machine that was primarily designed to fix the long-lasting problem of the DOM series, with the hovering system of the Domlings made possible by their thermonuclear jet engines, largely affecting the operating range of the DOM line as a whole due to sheer fuel consumption. To make things worse, most DOM designs were neither conceptualized around carrying nearly enough fuel to sustain such engines long-term, neither around bringing spare fuel tanks, thus making high-speed gliding combat, the DOM main gimmick, not sustainable long-term as a main method of locomotion. To address this series-wide issue, the Dwadge thus introduced a revamped design to accommodate the actual carburant needs of a thermonuclear jet engine, with the suit introducing two small fuel pockets on each leg, but more notably one main fuel tank placed on its central torso, alongside two smaller tanks placed at the rear of its legs. This largely increased propellant capacity was paired with a new improved thermonuclear engine, providing nearly twice as much thrust as the old DOMs, while also mounting dust filtering grills and a water-cooled radiator, thus not only significantly extending the Dwadge operating time, but also making it capable of reaching higher hovering speeds. Ice on decay, the Dwadge hovering controls were revamped compared to the older, brutish system of the original DOM, enabling it to glide at high speed even in desertic or urban environments and dodge obstacles with more finesse. Aside from this improved hovering system, the Dwadge also introduced additional features meant to extend its versatility in guerrilla combat, installing two pairs of 30mm, sometimes disputed as 60mm, head Vulcans for anti-infantry purposes and disposal of smaller vehicles, alongside two protruding antennas placed on its backpack, greatly extending its sensor range. Like the regular DOM, the Dwadge retained the inbuilt chest-placed scattering beam gun for flashing attacks, alongside the signature hit saber and giant bazooka synonymous with the DOM series, although the Dwadge usually ditched those last two weapons for its own new advanced handheld assets. The Dwadge notably introduced a double-bladed large hit axe as its main close-range weapon, much more effective than the Zaku hit tomahawk or the DOM hit saber, alongside a 380mm clothed bazooka, mounting smoke dischargers and a compartment for heat explosive ammo, hence the thermal protection cloth. All these things combined eventually turned the Dwadge into an extremely high-performance mobile suit, superb as a heavy mobile suit, tailored for multi-environment combat and perfect for guerrilla warfare, thus making it one, if not the best Xion's ground model of the entire war. As always, no suit is perfect as stated in all our videos, with the Dwadge itself also coming with its own share of flaws. First of all, the strengthening of nearly all of the DOM features, coupled with the increased number of inner components and technologies, resulted in the Dwadge being forced to externalize many of its power cables, something the DOM line had managed to avoid since its original conception. While some theories suggest these offered better heat dissipation to the Dwadge, required after the steroid upgrade of all of the DOM features, these exposed power cables were now weak spots for enemy pilots to target, directly damaging these cables, usually resulting in impaired performance due to cut transmission between generator and limbs. Secondly, and most importantly, although the Dwadge was not that expensive for its high performance, its high-tech design eventually resulted in constant development setbacks, delaying its production to the point of the model being far from being ready by the time of the Battle of Odessa, the gravity front battle where it could have been able to make a real difference in the grand scheme of things. Nonetheless, the Dwadge was still produced in extensive quantities, with the model being quickly adopted after the war by many Zion remnants, but also by the Federation forces themselves, incentivizing many Zion remnants or independentist movements to go raid Federation armories to get their hands on these upgraded versions. The Dwadge would remain a common sight in Africa for decades to come, still proving its high performance in the era of 2nd, 3rd, and even 4th generation suits, despite being barely a 1st generation model itself. But that's enough setting for today, let's get to our lore. The year is November UC79. At that time, the one-year war was reaching its first decisive stages, with the Principality of Zion, locked on the so-called Gravity Front, preparing to face the bulk of the Federation forces as part of their massive reconquest operation, Operation Odessa. After its consecutive victorious campaigns in space during the one-week battle, then followed by the infamous Battle of Loom, the Principality of Zion had started the one-year war with heavy odds in its favor, using this early momentum to bring the fight to the Federation's own power base, launching multiple drop operations on Earth between March and April UC79. Through these drop operations, Zion had quickly been able to take control of massive amounts of land out of Federation hands, conquering most of North America, Western Europe, Eastern and Southern Asia, Australia, Africa, and even parts of South America, all of that in the span of a couple of months. During these drop operations, Zion had waged war through the use of somewhat concerning designs conceptualized back in their core colonies, such as the Gau-class attack carriers or even the absurd Magella attack tanks, while instead retrofitting many Federation captured designs, primarily submarines, and also producing locally their own assets later on through cooperation with anti-Federation earthly cells, with the Doubday-class land battleship being a prime example. Of course, Zion had also brought to Earth their brand new wonder weapon, the mobile suit, with the post-Antarctic Treaty new Zaku-2, the F-Type, being cited as part of the earliest drop operations, before being quickly phased out for its causing the J-Type, the proper Zaku-2 ground type. With the Zaku-2 ground type, Zion quickly scored a streak of victories over the still mobile suitless Federation forces, becoming the nightmare of the armored infantry of the Federation ground forces and the Death Reaper for many Type 61 main battle tanks. By late spring U79, Zion's streak of successes however started to grow stale, with the Federation forces mostly switching to guerrilla warfare, thus forcing Zion to take a look back and start consolidating their gains instead of always moving forward with the conquest. Around that time, Zion's engineers and senior officers however started to realize a flaw inherent in the mainstay Zaku-2 J-Type. A flaw newer models such as the Amphibious line or the Urban Goof had not been able to resolve on their own, aka a cruel lack of mobility. Indeed, under 1G environments, mobile suits were severely hampered by their bipedal design, with their thrusters only enabling short bursts and high jumps, while MBAC was nearly completely negated in ground warfare, thus leaving them with roughly 90-100 km per hour of running speeds. While fast enough to catch up with tanks and most armored infantry the Federation was still massively relying on at that time, neither Zakus nor Goofs were really capable of high-speed combat on the ground, thus making them prime targets to ambush via stationary defenses or sneaky maneuvers from tank divisions. Even worse, Goofs and Zakus were usually moved around either by making them walk or by carrying them in transports such as the Samson trucks or Fat Uncle copters, meaning their deployment speed left much to be desired and often too slow to respond in time to Federation hit-and-run attacks. To address this issue, Zion at first experimented with a flight-capable Goof, the MS-07H series, which ended up in a series of failures or disappointments before switching to the idea of a heavy mobile suit relying on a thermonuclear jet engine to hover at high speed over the ground, the MS-09G Dwadge. The Dwadge development history is in itself a series of trial and errors and nearly 6 months of long development carried by the Zymat company with the help of the rival Zeonic, and majorly spearheaded by the infamous California base one of Zion's main think tanks on Earth, with cooperation from the Granada facility and McCovey R&D Center in Odessa. This project eventually bore its fruits around June UC79, although the production version of the dome, the proper MS-09, wouldn't really appear on a wider scale before September of that same year. Now, the dome was in itself the solution to the issues Zion's engineers had tried to fix with its development, with its thermonuclear jet engine enabling it to reach speeds closing to 381 km per hour, thus making it perfectly suitable for high-speed combat over the ground and long-distance deployment through hovering. Yet, as time went by, Zion's pilots started reporting concerns about the dome itself, with the design seemingly suffering from a streak of issues on its own, and not minor ones. First of all, the dome, while excellent in localized warfare all across the globe, was still rather vulnerable to environmental hazards, with Zimad having already worked on the issue since the prototype dome, spawning a separate dome line for such purposes, kickstarted by the also infamous Dome Tropical test type. Now, this first issue was rather a low concern, not only due to the existence of the dedicated family of the Tropical test type, but also the ability of the dome design to be tweaked for environmental adaptation, with multiple local combat variants of the dome, such as the Dome Cold Climate type, Dome Blizzard, Dome Tropen, and the West Desert being quickly produced for localized needs, starting by October UC79. Now, much more concerning was the fact that the dome was found to suffer from extremely poor operating time and cruising range, not because of a flaw in its thermonuclear jet engine, but by its sheer fuel consumption, meaning that the dome could easily be used in combat as a high-speed glider unit, but would quickly run dry when attempting to reach faraway locations through its own hovering means. This was made worse by the dome's specific new design, which relied on a single small internal fuel tank and didn't consider bringing aboard fuel cartridges to directly inject propellant when in dire needs, like some high-mobility Zakus used to do, or add hardpoints to carry additional spare fuel tanks. This essentially meant that the dome had to make do with its ridiculous internal tank to feed its jet engines, and once it ran dry, it had to return to a facility to be refueled, instead of locally switching the fuel tank with a spare one, or refuel it with cartridges. Sum up, this effectively rendered the dome still tributary to transport vehicles to be deployed on the battlefront, fully negating the advantages it had been given to be freed of such needs simply because of fuel consumption. Now, these major issues of the dome design were not important enough to doom the dome itself and its mobile suit line, although it decisively warranted the start of a related development project for an improved design freed of those flaws, the Dwadge. When exactly the Dwadge development project started and under which exact circumstances is up to many debates and theories even inside official sources, with some, however, concurring that the Dwadge was initially simply and very broadly commissioned by the Zion's Admiralty as the next generation successor for the dome, with multiple departments answering the call independently. What I am trying to say is that the Dwadge was more of a vague request for a proper successor to the Dome Rick Dome, with at least two different departments starting to design their own Dome-type successor, with little to no cooperation between branches. In space, the Pezun Arsenal, at that time involved in its own so-called Pezun project, was one of such departments that headed the call, eventually designing their own hybrid space ground-capable design specialized in local combat, a vast improvement of the dome design that would receive the nickname of Dwadge under the codename of MS-10, being eventually renamed at some point Pezun Dowadge or Dwadge to distinguish it from the results of the other departments. On Earth, the infamous California base was the one terrestrial facility that answered the call for the Dwadge, instead conceptualizing it as a next-generation enhanced version of the dome, capable of easily withstanding hazardous climates, featuring an overall superior performance, while of course fixing the low mobility problems. When exactly did the California base start their work for the Dwadge is not exactly sure, although it is generally assumed for it to have started around October UC79, around 1 month before the Battle of Odessa. The start of the California base work is however a bit more known, with the terrestrial facility soon starting applying modifications on a regular MS-09 DOM, turning it into the mobile suit known as the MS-09F, nicknamed Dwadge Custom, and sometimes referred to as the Dom Kai. A prototype machine created by adding enhancements over a regular DOM frame, the Dwadge Custom was more or less a proof of concept that bridged the DOM and the Dwadge the California base was conceptualizing, with the main modification being a large radiator system mounted on its back and featuring external pipes, a sort of predecessor to the water-cooled version the Dwadge would equip, thus significantly reducing overheating issues to make it more suitable for tropical and desertic terrains, while also seemingly extending its hovering speed to nearly 400 km per hour. Aside from this main feature, the only difference of the Dwadge Custom compared to its former form was its handled and inbuilt weaponries, with the Custom introducing a pair of 3-tube smoke dischargers on its shoulders, while also adopting an additional pistol as a secondary weapon, which could be fixed on its backpack through a dedicated hardpoint without taking the slot of the Heat Saber or Giant Bazooka. Now, while the Dwadge Custom didn't seem to include additional fuel tanks and so apparently didn't fix the fuel consumption problem of the original DOM, it still featured a rather interesting gimmick, with the Dwadge Custom mounting a bolted screw plate on each of its legs. Although these plates have never been discussed anywhere in details, these could very likely be direct entry ports for the Dwadge Custom to refill its fuel tank through its legs, thus enabling the modified DOM to be refueled during operations and kept active on the battlefield longer. In terms of deployment history, it is known that the Dwadge Custom was in itself a standalone prototype that was quickly scrubbed from official records, with the MS-09F model number being quickly claimed by the Dom 5, produced by the Granada facility as soon as the united maintenance plan started being discussed, which would pass it to other suits developed by them for similar purposes, most notably the Dom Tropen and of course the West Desert. The Dom Custom would remain unused at the California base until late November UC-79, where the unit, alongside 2 regular DOMs, would be mothballed to the 13 Mobile Suit team of the Earth Attack Force for them to participate in the assault on Jaburo as part of the land divisions. There, the Custom and its wingmates would fight during the infamous Battle of Jaburo, although it is unclear if the Custom was used by the team ace pilot and leader, Lieutenant Colonel Hannibal Ross, or by its younger teammate, Dagner Romeo. There, one of the 3 DOMs was shot down by Jaburo turret defenses, and after depleting their ammunition, Ross and Romeo would be forced to retreat, with the attack on Jaburo ending up in a failure soon after. Ross and Romeo would then move to the space front and be captured as prisoners of war, later becoming a panel testing squadron for the Federation forces known as the Dragoon 13 by the time of the one-year war's conclusion. With the data collected by the Dom Custom, the California base would be able to finish up their work on their own Dwadge design, incorporating additional antennas, the infamous fuel tanks, and various new weaponries, thus delivering the long-awaited Dwadge before the competitors of the Pezun arsenal, with their creation being classified as the MS-09G, the proper Dwadge, considered the most advanced and final step of the terrestrial DOM line. When exactly the California base finalized the Dwadge is a matter of debate, although it is commonly believed to have taken place around early November UC-79, the Dwadge delays in production being considered dramatic for the Earth Attack Force, as it was believed that full complement of them would have decisively turned the tide of the Battle of Odessa and likely have kept Europe under Zion's banner. Despite Odessa falling without the much-needed Dwadge support, the California base was still able to use its own facilities to launch a full mass production of the Dwadge design, with 88 units being confirmed as having been produced between November and December UC-79, thus making the Dwadge widespread compared to many limited production models, yet at the same time too scarce to fully replace the DOM everywhere. The California base would continue pumping Dwadge units up until it's recaptured by the Federation forces in mid-December UC-79, and delivered a certain amount of them to the Fusion units resisting on the African front. After the conclusion of the one-year war, the Dwadge soon became the prized possession amongst the Zion remnants, notably due to its sheer performance and versatility, with many being modified on site by the remnants to continue their guerrilla war against the Federation forces. Now, after the end of the 1-year war, blueprints and schematics of the Dwadge fell into the hands of the Federation forces, with Federation engineers soon starting to find an interest in the reliable and very advanced design of this final dome relative. As a result, many of the captured African Dwadges were thus turned into what I will refer to as Dwadge Refits and replicated in turn, with those units being modernized to be repurposed by the Federation forces, receiving notably linear cockpits, enhanced generators to enable them to use beam weapons, and new armored parts made of a mix of Gundam alloy and titanium, a vast upgrade over the heavier and more fragile super hard steel alloy. At the same time, African Zion remnants and other anti-Federation movements such as the FLN, the African Liberation Front, would also start applying similar modifications across the years, while also stealing back many of the Federation twisted Dwadge refits as part of their endemic raids on lax Federation armories all across Africa. By the First Neo-Zion War, most surviving Dwadges had been modified in one way or another by either the Federation, Zion remnants or FLN, with the Dwadge refit being considered to reach levels of performance similar to second-generation mobile suits, although completely obsolete compared to the newer 3rd and 4th generation models that would become widespread even in Africa by mid-UC 88. According to some sources, Axis itself also actively contributed to model the Dwadge population during their stay on Earth, with Neo-Zion having brought over all the riggdoms they later retrofitted in emulation of local Dwadges, thus meaning that by UC 88, Dwadges all over Africa could be either old unmodded 1-year war units, old 1-year war units retrofitted by the local remnants, old 1-year war units retrofitted by the Federation, then stolen by freedom fighters, or even old riggdoms remade in the image of the other type of Dwadge by Axis. Yeah, confusing as hell. But let's rewind a bit our story to go all the way back to the late 1-year war. Aside from its regular form, the Dwadge was also produced alongside its own ace version, the MS-09H, known as the Dwadge Custom or Dwadge Kai. A slight modification of the Dwadge design, primarily meant for veteran and ace pilots requiring a small but much needed boost in performance, the Dwadge Custom primarily differed through its mounting different shoulder units, each coming with 2 additional chemical-based thrusters, thus granting it around 20% higher gliding speed than the regular Dwadge. Aside from this, the Dwadge Kai remained fairly similar to the regular version, meaning Dwadges could be converted fairly easily into Dwadge Kai as long as the powerful shoulder thruster units were available, which was not often the case, given how scarcely produced this would be. After the end of the 1-year war, many Dwadge Kais would continue their service in Africa, with some sources suggesting that much like the regular Dwadge, the custom version would also be deployed and modernized by the Federation and FLN, although this remains to be debated. Much more importantly, it is known that a certain regular Dwadge would be, over the years, upgraded and modernized by a certain Zion Ace pilot, being notably applied the specifications of the H-type, the custom machine fielded by the African legend Desert Rommel. An ace pilot renowned since the days of the 1-year war and a prolific Dwadge user himself, Desert Rommel was an expert pilot when it came to desert warfare and guerrilla tactics, and who chose to continue the fight with his men after the end of the 1-year war, defeating Federation armored divisions one after another on disputed African terrains. To continue his fight against the Federation, Rommel would extensively modify his personal Dwadge, resulting in the unit becoming something else after a few years of fighting. First of all, much like the Dwadge Refit, Rommel's Dwadge Custom was upgraded with a linear seat with a panoramic all-sky monitor, while also receiving a boosted generator for a massive increase in power output. In addition to that, Rommel's custom Dwadge also received parts in titanium and Gundam alloy and an additional exhaust vent placed on its crotch to easily purge accumulated heat during combat. Much more interestingly, Rommel's unit phased out the traditional Dwadge bazooka for a new weapon, a massive beam bazooka, which Rommel allegedly stole from Federation armories. Amusingly enough, This Federation-made weapon, which older sources claim Rommel took from a Federation base, is also suspiciously similar to the beam bazooka the prototype Dwadge was supposed to equip per same-era sources, thus creating a lore contradiction as that would have been an Axis design. However, given how Double Zeta states that the Federation forces in Africa either surrendered, fled, or outright defected as soon as Axis engaged its Earth invasion in UC-88, coupled with the suspiciously high number of Federation senior officers at Haman parties in Dakar, it wouldn't be far-fetched to consider that a lot of Federation officers were actually on Neozeon's payroll even before Haman's arrival in Africa, with bases under their command covertly producing weapons and parts for the incoming Axis forces. This could also explain the mysterious presence of some Gaza-type mobile suits on Earth even before the Earth campaign, and why something close to the phased-out Dwadge beam bazooka, rejected after the formal model was approved, would end up there on Earth in the first place. Finally, this would mean that Rommel would have raided Federation bases covertly working for his own natural allies, Neozeon, that would soon come to Africa as part of their invasion. In any case, neither Rommel's abilities, his overly customized mobile suit or fancy beam bazooka would in the end save him, with Rommel and his men later coming in conflict with the infamous Gundam team. Conflict they lost and costed Rommel his life and mobile suit. After the conclusion of the First Neozeon War, many Dwarves would remain in service as part of both the original Zeon remnants, but also the Axis-related Neozeon forces that were now stranded on Earth, with many Dwarves being locally modified in the late month of the UC-80s, such as the one you can see in the background, upgraded with heavier armor and an additional head sensor over the mono eye. Most notably, many Dwarves would be modified over time into what is referred to as the Dwadge late type, another refitment for the now 9 to 10 years old model. Mostly seen in the stranded Africa Corps during their debacle in UC-92, but with sighting tracing as early as late UC-89, the Dwadge late type differed from its previous form through a complete overhaul of its lower body, receiving much heavier armor with a special coating to increase its sturdiness, a boost of defense applied as mobile suits became scarce commodities in Africa for those stranded soldiers whose supply line vanished after the death of Aman Khan. Aside from this, the Dwadge late type is also said to be a sort of widespread adoption of the H-type, the Dwadge Custom main assets, with such mobile suits adopting similar shoulder engines, although vented ones rather than open cam thrusters. In terms of minor details, the Dwadge late type also incorporated long fin antennas on its shoulders in the place of traditional shorter antennas seen in the common version, while also adopting a simpler head design with a supplementary head antenna and no Vulcans anymore. Weaponry-wise, the Dwadge late type remained tributary to Neozeon's desperate situation on Earth, with the model being often forced to relinquish its signature weapons and instead pick whatever was available as supplies, with some of them at least getting their hands on the infamous PZG-44 guns, a long anti-mobile suit rifle with both an external feeding ammo system and an internal magazine. Now, rather interestingly, the Condoverse has shown us that the Dwadge late type is able, through simple backpack changes, to switch between 3 different variations. Variations I am going to explain here, as there is quite some stuff to unpack. The first variant is the regular G-type, aka the regular backpack with a supplementary fuel tank and the 2 grilled thrusters, which also standardizes the assets of the H-type with similar shoulder block units fixed on the backpack. This one is the traditional version and is stated to be made for desert combat in mind. The second one, the K-type, is an enhanced version based on the old H-type, which uses similar block shoulder units fixed alongside a much more enlarged rear engine, which is a secondary thermonuclear jet engine, thus bringing the Dwadge hovering speed to new heights. Finally, there is a third backpack that transitions the Dwadge into what is referred to as the Dwadge F-type, with that unit mounting a more traditional dome backpack but doubled, lacking the shoulder units and blade antennas altogether, and storing an inbuilt cooling canister. The F-type seems to be the less desertic variations of the Dwadge late type, likely boosting better speed and road thrust in middle weather and terrains, but subpar in hazardous environments, thus explaining the existence of the G, H and K types as well. Now it's my time to be a professional hater because the Gundam wiki and even the Japanese Wikipedia, which is usually more trustworthy, have claimed that the Dwadge F-type is actually the E-type, a misconception I'm going to break down for you since I lost my sanity through it. See, depending on which edition of Revival of Zion you read, the F-type backpack has been presented with two different names, with one stating it to be the E-type and one stating it to be the F-type. Now, at the same time, whatever the source, whatever the edition, we also get the same information that the Dwadge has 4 variants, the F, G, H and K type, while being specifically shown a Dwadge F-type in the background, which clearly mounts that specific backpack due to the lack of antennas. The only time the E-type is referred to is in one edition for the backpack description, while the other corrects it to F-type, and both sources always discussed about a F-type, never a E-type. In the end, it's likely a misprint or an error from Kondo, but you get the idea, there's no E-type. Now, to close the video, there are 2 remaining things I want to discuss. First, there is a strong possibility that the F and K types are not just exclusive to the Dwadge late type, but much like the H type, were originally created for the 1-year war era Dwadge, although of course we will likely never know whether that was the case. Secondly, the Dwadge late type has been shown in either its G or K configuration to be able to fly in space in the game Advanced Operation, which could show that the late type was not only a ground roamer, as surprising as it is. Now, due to its large production numbers, the Dwadge would always remain endemic in the poorly pacified African continent, with not all Dwadge being modified into Refits or late types, but many remaining as they were, with minor modifications even after UC-92, being still fielded as late as UC-96 during the Battle of Torrington, but also in the UC-120s as seen recently in F-90 cluster, again causing problems in Africa. Despite its long service, the Dwadge would surprisingly never be refined by Mars Zion, although the Martian remnants would eventually deploy multiple types of RF DOMs, which themselves descend from the Zion Mars Dom 3, a mobile suit which used near-identical shoulder units to the Dwadge Customs, thus making the RF Dom Desert type kind of a long-lost nephew suit of the venerable Dwadge down the line. And with this video comes to an end. Subscribe if you aren't, because yes, I see all of the sons of Dwadge that follow my releases without giving me the sub. You're almost as endemic as the Dwadge is in Africa, and that's not a compliment. Oh, and yes, we also have a Discord, feel free to join us down there. Marcon code out.
But who will survive?